From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. It's Tuesday, August 15th. She's a TikTok sensation nobody saw coming. Monica Poli, a middle-aged Venetian woman, has racked up millions of views on social media for videos in which she screams at local thieves in order to chase them away from tourists.
Attenzione borseggiatrici! Attenzione pickpocket!
Videos taken in her local train station or crowded square show how her screaming sends suspected pickpockets running, turning up their hoods to cover their faces. Her screeches have been turned into viral memes, even a dance track. But lately, some unexpected facts about this homegrown vigilante have emerged. Today, digital foreign editor Chris Zappone on why Monica Poli has become a sensation and if her popularity is tied to a growing wave of anti-immigration populism that's sweeping Europe. So, Chris, a Venice local named Monica Poli has become a TikTok sensation for publicly shaming pickpockets on the streets. Can you tell us about Monica Poli? Who is she and what does she do in these videos?
Well, what's visible in the videos is a shot from the perspective of the speaker, and she sort of sifts through the crowds of Venice, where it's very crowded in the narrow streets, and she identifies, to her satisfaction, people who are involved in pickpocketing or activity that's like pickpocketing, and then she starts to call them out, and she says something like, "Attention, pickpockets," in Italian.
Attenzione borseggiatrici! Attenzione pickpocket! Attenzione pickpocket!
And then heads turn, and often in the video, the people sort of beat a path quickly out of the way of her camera.
Attenzione che dai capellino! Ora! Ora! Attenzione borseggiatrici!
According to reporting, she has cleaned offices for a living. She is a local council member in Venice there. So she has been doing this as part of a group for some time now. And she sort of has taken it upon herself and her colleagues to do this sort of freelance patrol to protect tourists. They used to speak to local TV and radio. They would put up notices on the streets, like handbills and the like. And then they realized, well, wait, if we want to try to reach people before they come to Venice so that they can be aware of this, why don't we try this new social media thing? So let's get on Instagram, let's get on TikTok. And that, I think, is where she really got on the international radar.
Okay, and so we know from reporting that she patrols the streets of her hometown for up to 6 hours a night, is what I believe she said after she's done her work, and that she's a member of this wider amateur anti-pickpocketing group in Venice. So can you tell us about this group and what have they actually managed to accomplish?
So the group is called Cittadini non distratti. So that's translated to the undistracted citizens. So that means basically citizens with their eyes open. So they patrol, I don't want to overstate with the word patrol, but they are out and among the tourists, and there are throngs of tourists in Venice who are often sort of in a state of wonder looking at the famous architecture and the waterways and the canals. And they try to bring attention to people who might be sidling up next to them to try to pick their pockets or to commit some sort of street crime. Now, they claim that they have been behind various prosecutions or various cases where the police have come in and actually arrested pickpockets. So there's sort of this extension of the eyes of the police. That does make them, in a way, a vigilante group. So it has to be treated with some caution, I guess, the activity that they're doing. I think you have to understand that in a city like Venice or in a northern Italian city, they have a tremendous pride and sort of stewardship for their antiquities and for the architecture that they have there. So I think for them, this is probably, to a degree, an expression of their interest in having a city that is not overrun with crime, that there's some sense of order. Now, there is a possibility that this can be abused as well, but I think that that's probably the motivation for this group.
Okay, and so back to Monica Poli herself, because she told the New York Times that about 5 years ago, in doing this work, she suffered. 4 girls fought her, and she said that, people stopped to see the action. They didn't help. She was in a neck collar for 20 days, and she's become a bit of an underdog hero as the face of this sort of once obscure group. But then a few weeks ago, we started learning more about Poli's background, and the details give us perhaps a different picture of her activities. So what did we find out about her?
Well, it was revealed and reported that she, as a council member in Venice, is also a member of a political party there called Lega, but it was originally called Lega Nord, and it's the Northern League. Today it's just called the League in English. So it's a far-right party that actually basically got its start as a protest party for the north of Italy that wanted to break off from the rest of Italy. So it was considered fairly xenophobic, hostile to immigration. It was also hostile to Muslim immigration in particular, but it was in a large degree a protest party against the power of Rome. This party has evolved since then, but this was her background and this is her political affiliation. It's funny, you mentioned her being seen as an underdog. I think that for a lot of the people in this party, they sort of portray themselves as this underdog that's fighting for their local identity against the machinations of the central government on one hand and Europe and the world on another.
That's interesting. And it's led some social media users to sort of question, well, if she's a member of this party, who is she targeting at the videos that don't actually show any actual pickpocketing?
Yeah, no, I mean, that is a great question. And the great thing about social media is even when the facts are agreed, the meaning can diverge wildly. So the facts are we see her sort of passing through the city, calling out people who flee from her camera. But it is a question of, are these people actually involved in crime? Or is it just her perception that they're involved in crime? Or does it just appear that they are involved in crime based on the shot? So there are questions that have been raised about that and whether or not this really dovetails with a sort of a worldview that I guess you'd find from a member of the League. So this far-right party that has a sort of perspective that's pretty contentious with foreigners and with people from the outside that in any way sort of challenge the local identity of the people of northern Italy.
Right. And dovetailing with what you just said, have been some sort of, I guess, slightly suspicious remarks that Monica Poli has said herself about how she actually knows when someone is a pickpocket. She told the New York Times, the way they look at people, the way they look at bags, I have a sixth sense. I have something inside me and I recognize it immediately. So that raises some questions. But I understand Monica Poli herself denies that her actions have a political bent?
Yes, that's my understanding. And you're right. She has said something to the effect of, I can tell, by the way that they look. I mean, that's where you get into this area where if it is vigilante justice in any form, it can be a bit subjective and a bit troubling because what recourse does somebody who's accused on one of these videos have? Without doubting her own familiarity with her own city, there's a very fair question about whether or not she's getting it right or if she's just profiling people that she would suspect don't belong or are not the type of people that she would like to see among the crowds of tourists in Venice.
So can you walk us through this and tell us a bit more about this political party that's known for its xenophobic views that Monica Poli is aligned with?
Well, right. I mean, from the top down, Lega has long criticized and made statements about the Roma people who have a population in Italy, about the camps that they live in, their role in society. And so this does very much align, at least on the surface, with some of this rhetoric that's coming out of this far-right party. And this, again, is very consistent with the sort of the worldview that the League promotes, which is that here's a virtuous population of Italians and they are under siege from outsiders and from foreigners. And the Roma are another set of foreigners that have been in Italy for quite some time, to be clear. And they're also historically a people that have been maligned and have been persecuted. As we know, there were people of the Roma community that were put in concentration camps during the Holocaust. So there is some history here, and it is a reason to be very cautious about thinking that what Monica Poli is doing is purely just a do-gooder that's taking justice into her own hands. There's also a political or an ethnic dimension to it that you can't overlook.
Right. And all of this is happening within a broader context, spread of far right-wing parties, not just in Italy, but elsewhere in Europe. So can you tell us about this and about Italy's new government? Just voted in 10 months ago, and it is the furthest to the right at any point in Italy since the rule of Benito Mussolini and his fascist party. So can you sort of walk us through this and what has led in Italy to this party gaining power? So
this is something that we're seeing that's happening through Europe at this time. The government in Italy now has Lega as one of the members, the deputy prime minister, Matteo Salvini. He is a member of the Lega, and he serves with Giorgia Meloni. So she herself is a member of a far-right party called Fratelli d'Italia.
Giorgia Meloni will lead Italy's most right-wing administration since the fascist era of Benito Mussolini.
Being the most right-wing in the country's Republican history.
Giorgia, sono una donna, sono una madre, sono italiana, sono cristiana, non me lo toglierete.
Which has its political, if you look back in its lineage, it would be related back to the fascist party of Mussolini, although there are some big changes that have happened over that time before it's become mainstream as it is today.
Social conservatism, as well as anti-immigration and Eurosceptic rhetoric, all part of Meloni's political appeal. Her Nationalist Brothers of Italy party won last month's election, along with two others, Matteo Salvini's far-right League and the controversial former Prime Minister.
Lega Nord began as a protest party that really never had power in a meaningful way because it was so connected to its geography. And so Lega moved from a protest party to a more mainstream and yet far-right party that didn't abandon its core beliefs, but it became much more palatable to the broader public. So we've seen this happen in Italy, which is sort of a microcosm of the story of the rise of the far-right through Europe. And we've seen this happen in Spain, we've seen it in France with Marine Le Pen.
Marine Le Pen has announced her bid to become president. The far-right leader is hoping to ride the same wave of nationalism that led to Brexit and elected Donald Trump president of the US. The French election.
In Poland and Hungary, of course, is very famous with the government of Viktor Orban, who's acted as a sort of mini Putin in a way, and actively exported this sort of highly socially conservative view, far-right view, beyond its own borders.
Viktor Orban, famed for his autocratic, illiberal style of government and his very close ties to Vladimir Putin. So this is this trend that we're seeing in parliamentary democracies in a lot of places where the center is eventually vacated and the extremes start to attract more followers.
Okay, so what impact is this having on the people of Italy?
Well, I mean, it's a very interesting moment. I mean, it really does begin with speech in terms of they are willing to say things in public and willing to use speech in this way that's they're happy to scapegoat. And I think that is a troubling development for any sort of liberal democracy.
Matteo Salvini, the leader of the far-right League Party, routinely tweets that they are gypsy thieves and he will bulldoze their camps.
They're happy to point out various populations and say, no, you're not welcome here. No, you don't belong here.
Of course, the Roma people have seen all the messages and they're outraged by this assault on them.
It's pure propaganda. It's racism. The word Zingari, gypsy, shouldn't be used at all. He talks about bulldozers.
So that is something that's being very much integrated, I think, into a lot of the politics, the parliamentary politics in Europe. On the flip side, I think that they also are responding to probably the excesses of globalization, immigration. It's a bit difficult for us to get our heads around, but in Europe, the amount of immigration they've had coming from the Middle East, coming from Africa, is dramatic.
Italy's government says it's struggling to handle an influx of migrants arriving on its shores. This week, it declared a state of emergency.
The sharp rise in the number of people crossing over to Italy from North Africa.
One of the most divisive issues of the past few years is once again back on the EU's agenda. None other than migration. Poland and Hungary hijacked talks at a summit in Brussels on Thursday and Friday, leaving leaders without any final decision on the topic.
And it does actually change the character in some of the communities in Europe. So it is very much front of mind. And because of the geography, it's not clear that that's going to change. So they've made this immigration a very central part of their political identity. And I think, in large part, when you look at the contemporary far right in Europe, a lot of it is really this ongoing sort of endless identity battle. It really is. And so they're using language in this way that I think can be potentially dangerous. At the same time, I think when we talk about the far right today, it is not a carbon copy of the far right in the 1920s and 30s for some very significant sort of economic and political reasons.
I mean, it's fascinating stuff. And I guess to bring it back to Monica Poli, she has said that her anti-pickpocketing group is distinguished because it's the first of its kind in Italy, but she's also said that other cities have them, like Rome and Barcelona. Is there any suggestion that these groups might also be linked to far-right political groups?
Well, I should say, in fairness, I mean, pickpocketing does happen, especially in these cities that have these piazzas and the plazas that draw lots of tourists. And I say that as somebody who actually has been pickpocketed once in Milan. So this does happen, and it is a social ill. But in terms of any political affiliation with these groups, I would have to see evidence of that before I'd be willing to make that leap. But in the case of Monica Poli, sure, she's got this background where she's related, or she's a member of Lega, and she's doing this in the streets in Venice.
Thank you, Chris, for joining us.
Thanks, Samantha.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by Julia Carr-Katzel, with technical assistance by Cormac Lally. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Samantha Selinger Morris. This is Please Explain. Thanks for listening.